Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Coming up, conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre on the WE scandal, an exciting initiative for the conservative leadership race and for press freedom, and also cancel culture takes another victim.
The Andrew Lawton Show starts right now.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of the Andrew Lawton Show, midweek edition here. It is Wednesday and we are going to put the "we" in Wednesday. I've been waiting since Monday to use that joke and I finally get to now. You know, Justin Trudeau put out his daily itinerary for Wednesday and it was private meetings, so no public itinerary, no public announcements, no press conferences, no media avail, and all I could think of is, you know, how it looked like the "we," the W and the E were capitalized in Wednesday, but I digress. I'm going like full QAnon conspiracy theory on this. In any case, the scandal is continuing to balloon, and this is a big problem right now. We know that Justin Trudeau was giving a multi-million-dollar contract, almost worth $1 billion of government money, under the control of a charity that has been paying his buddies and his family members and all that stuff. And then Justin Trudeau finally apologized. Now, this comes after being rather unrepentant last week. He said he made a mistake, he did the wrong thing, he should have recused himself from the discussions. This is what he said on Monday.
This morning, I know people want to hear more about the Canada Student Service Grant Program in particular. I know there are many questions and problems with the way this program is run about, and I know people have concerns about it. I get that. I made a mistake in not recusing myself immediately from the discussions, given our family's history. And I'm sincerely sorry about not having done that.
Now, there are two options here. It's either better late than never or too little too late. And I'm going to probably side with too little too late because of how Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister's office were talking about this last week by saying, listen, it's only about serving children. It's not about who benefited. They had an option to clean this up weeks ago. They had an option to clean it up last week, and they didn't. So I don't think we can really give them too much credit for doing the right thing if it's coming after attempting to deflect and muddle and muddy the discussion for several days. That's my take on this. And now we have the another development of this in the National Post, that it was the Trudeau government itself that organized and contributed over $1 million to a WE Day event in 2017, during which the Post says, we likely gave some of that money to Margaret Trudeau to speak. Now, I don't think this is that, you know, this was orchestrated by the PMO. I don't think it's that, you know, they said, all right, we're going to invite you guys to Ottawa, we're going to pay you, but you have to invite my mom to speak. That's the rule. No, but I think it shows the deep and intricately linked ties that exist between we and the government, the long-standing ties, financial and familial, and it really reinforces the question of why on earth did Trudeau think that it was his right to not recuse himself from this discussion? Why did Bill Morneau not think that as well? And by the way, Seamus O'Regan and Katie Telford, also two very high-ranking Liberals, one in Cabinet, one in the PMO, also have fundraised hundreds of thousands of dollars for we. We found this out last week as well. So all of this is coming to a head right now, and as a tax-paying Canadian, I think most people are looking at this and saying, like, what? You could not get away with this in any other sector. You could not get away with it in any other space, but this is what passes for integrity in Justin Trudeau's government. And look, Mary Dawson, who's the former ethics commissioner, says she's fairly certain that he's going to have been found to have contravened the rules. But I would look at, again, Mary Dawson's thing and say, look, she may be right, but this reinforces why it is so dangerous right now that we have an ethics regime that has absolutely no teeth. It'll cost him $500. He can cover it by doing just a 5-minute speech for we, and that will be enough. And that makes it go away. There's no real remedy that the ethics commissioner can force, and more importantly, there's no real punishment for breaking the rules, even if you are, as Justin Trudeau is when it comes to federal ethics rules, a repeat offender. So the Conservatives on the Finance Committee are calling Justin Trudeau to the committee to testify. This is what the Conservatives are trying to seek here. Pierre Poilievre is the Conservative finance critic and a member of Parliament. He joins us on the line now. Pierre, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Good to be with you.
So let's talk about, I mean, there are a lot of aspects to this. I mean, I made a comment on the show the other day that I think we should be getting a bulk discount on ethics investigations, but we're talking about a situation here that I think is continuously rearing its head, which is just a fundamental disrespect for the federal ethics laws and just, I'd say, for political integrity in general.
I agree with you. I think the problem we have here is that the Prime Minister thinks he's a king. He has been told his whole life that he's a prince. And princes and kings often don't think that the rules of the realm apply to them. So he would probably subconsciously anyway say, yes, normally it would be unethical for a prime minister to direct $1 billion sole source contract to a group that had paid his family $300,000, but I'm no mere mortal. I'm not a normal prime minister. I'm a prince and a king, and I can do whatever I want. I think that is the prime minister's personal sentiment. I think that's how he views the world. And the media, the mainstream media on Parliament Hill, not the media out in the real world, but those around him in the precinct, reinforced that notion, and they were doing everything they could during the pandemic to treat him as though he was a king who would come out of his castle and grace us all with his presence daily, giving declarations and edicts for us all to follow, and that even questioning his conduct was completely, almost treasonous. And I think through that experience, he started to think that he could just do anything he wanted, and he did.
And when you mention questioning, the Conservatives have now tried to get him before the Finance Committee to answer questions. I mean, there are two aspects of this. Number one, how likely do you think it is that that'll happen? And number two, what is it that you can really get out of this? I mean, it does seem plain as day what happened. What more is there that you think we need to learn?
Well, we want to know where this idea came from. I mean, he continually claims that the public service concocted this scheme. Andrew, I used to be the minister responsible for employment and training, and I can tell you there's no way the bureaucracy in that department would have concocted this idea. It just doesn't make any sense, especially given that the purported purpose of the program is to pay young people to help charities and non-for-profits. But there's already a program that does that. It's called the Cannabis Summer Jobs Program. In fact, the amounts that they subsidize hourly wages is similar to what Trudeau proposes with this new scheme. So in other words, it's basically a duplication of something already done within the public service. I would be stunned if public servants, knowing that, and they do, would have recommended farming the program out that they already run inside. And so I believe that we need to find out where this idea originated. And I suspect that what we will find as we follow the breadcrumbs is that it was the team Trudeau, the elites around him, and those who stood to profit from this transaction who concocted it rather than public servants.
You mentioned something interesting there about the pre-existing program. If you were to take out the Trudeau-we connections and all of the connections between Bill Morneau and we and Seamus O'Regan and we and take out all of those things, does it seem like it was just a bad program in general? I mean, or something that was unnecessary, even if you take out the conflicts of interest?
Oh, absolutely. It's a ridiculous concept. I mean, you know, Orwell warns us that whenever governments abuse language, they're probably abusing other things at the same time. And to start with, he calls it a paid volunteer program. Well, that's impossible. I mean, you can either be paid or you can volunteer, but you can't be paid to volunteer. If you're paid, then you're not, by definition, a volunteer.
Then it's a summer job, a la Canada Summer Jobs Program.
Exactly, it's a summer job. Now, they needed to invent a new name, though, in order to justify a new program. And that was the only reason why this program, why this name was created. They would have loved to just say it's a summer job program, but if they did that, then they wouldn't have been able to justify creating a separate billion-dollar sole source contract, everyone would have said, well, why wouldn't you just use the program that already goes by that name? So whenever you see language that is abused, you'll see other abuses. The other thing, Andrew, I would point out is that so often with these scandals, they result from governments doing things that they have no business doing in the first place, right? Like the sponsorship program. Was it really justified for any government to be putting advertorials and advertisements up at these events all over a particular province? No, not really. That's not the role of government. Billion-dollar gun registry. Well, I mean, even if it had cost $1, it was something the government should not have been doing. And here again, we have government interfering with the charitable sector to effectively corrupt the very meaning of a benevolent word like volunteer. Again, not the role of government. And so whenever governments venture outside of their core purpose, they tend to attract corruption. Or perhaps it's the other way around. Perhaps corruption attracts government outside of its core mandate.
Yeah, that's a really great point on this. And I'm all for finding ways that we can, perhaps download the bureaucracy's responsibilities and find private sector delivery of services. But that doesn't seem at all like what this was. This was really just expanding the bureaucracy to a group that wouldn't even have the accountability. You're
absolutely right. And this is something we always have to watch out for. This happens again and again. We as conservatives, we say, look, let's remove government and allow either the private sector or the societal sectors like charity and philanthropy to replace it. And then but we have to be careful that we don't get the opposite of what we are looking for, right? So instead of, in this case, instead of vacating the space, the government vacating the space so that the volunteer and charitable sector could fill it, they try to nationalize the volunteer and charitable sector and instead of expanding the role of society and shrinking the role of government, they did exactly the opposite. And we see this, for example, with the infrastructure bank. I mean, we'd all like to see more private sector investment in infrastructure. But with the infrastructure bank, what they're doing is the opposite. They're taking things that are already privately financed and nationalizing the risk. So we have to be very careful to watch the real meaning of words and actions to determine if government is in fact just grabbing more power and controlling more and more of our lives.
I mentioned earlier on in the show, one of the big problems is that our ethics infrastructure that we have for investigating and pursuing these doesn't really have any teeth. And we know this because Justin Trudeau has been found to have violated this multiple times and other parts of his government as well. What do you think needs to be done to reform the ethics and conflict of interest process so that there's actually some heft behind it when they go after lawmakers that have broken the rules?
Well, listen, I don't know that I think that the problem with the previous violations is that the police didn't do their job. And we have law enforcement to apply the criminal code. In the case of the Aga Khan Island, the police simply just didn't do their job. There are provisions in the criminal code that ban government officials from accepting benefits from entities that are seeking assistance from government. And so in the case of the Aga Khan Billionaire Island vacation, Trudeau took $200,000 of vacations from someone asking him personally for a $15 million grant. That's a criminal code violation. The RCMP doesn't disagree with me on that, by the way. We wrote them. They wrote back and they didn't say, no, he didn't break the law or we found exculpatory evidence. They said, no, we can't productively pursue an investigation. Those are the words that the letter said. So what the hell does that mean? You can't productively pursue an investigation. Were you stopped? Did someone in the government block you from doing your job? So in other words, the RCMP did not do its job. And frankly, if the Mounties felt they were implicated in that scandal, they should have just referred it to a different police force to do an independent criminal investigation. And I think maybe that's what the Mounties are going to have to do in this case, just simply say we're too close to the Prime Minister. The cabinet appoints the RCMP commissioner. maybe the Mounties ought to simply redirect the complaint to the OPP, the QPP, the Ottawa Police Service, or some other police entity that is not compromised by prime ministerial power.
So do you think the police should be involved in this situation as well then, just to be absolutely clear?
I do. I'm not saying, I haven't concluded that there was a criminal code breach. I'm neither a police officer nor a judge. So I don't have the, we don't have all the facts yet. But I certainly think that the police should examine whether or not there was a breach of trust, whether or not the Prime Minister considered the payment to his family to be an inducement, that motivated him to create this extremely unusual contract. And so there should be a high-level inspector or investigator with a police force go in, establish all of the facts, and determine whether or not the criminal code applies.
Just turning before we wrap things up, Pierre, to the broader financial state of Canada right now. We found out last week a deficit over $340 billion. I know that a lot of that was inevitable, just given government forcing people to shut down their businesses, so you have to have a bit of relief there. How much of that do you think was avoidable, though? I mean, I know that you've been critical, as has the leader of the Conservatives right now, Andrew Scheer, about a lot of the programs and how they were delivered. Do you think that we could have had an even smaller deficit?
Oh, there's no doubt. We should have gone into this with a balanced budget. From 2016 until 2019, the world economy was hot. And for some of that time, not all of it, some of that time, commodity prices were high. And the U.S. economy, which we have the privilege of neighboring, was on fire. And therefore, we had all the winds blowing at our backs. And there's no reason we ought not to have balanced the budget in that time period. If we had, then the balance going in would have been strong, the deficit would have been smaller, and the debt load we carried, total debt load, would have been about $80 or $90 billion smaller than it is right now. The other thing I would point out is that the programs that are designed to respond to COVID have serious anti-growth, anti-work attributes. Like if you're on this CERB program, you go back and earn more than $1,000, they kick you from the CERB to the curb. So a lot of workers are saying that they can't go back to work and they can't earn money for 16 weeks. We should remove that anti-work penalty, let people earn more than $1,000 and let them phase out their CERB as they earn more with their jobs. Same with the rent and wage subsidies. Both of them require businesses keep their revenues down 30 or in some cases 70% below pre-COVID levels. So that requires businesses to artificially suppress revenues in order to get government support. They should remove that and make those scalable programs so businesses are always better off with an extra sale or an extra dollar of revenue. Those kinds of pro-growth policies would allow businesses and workers to recover. It would reduce dependence on government and increase the taxes that businesses and workers pay under the existing rates. So we need a pro-growth agenda now. We cannot, the government and the Bank of Canada cannot simply pay the wages of the nation forever.
And I guess that just in closing, we know there's a Conservative leadership race on right now. The election could be theoretically at any point in the next couple of years. What do you think the Conservatives moving forward need to do, either in running for an election or even if they form government, to get the books in check? I mean, because obviously you have to close that deficit somehow. You don't want to raise revenues by increasing taxes, and certainly cutting spending is going to be something that will unleash the massive criticism that Conservatives are so accustomed to. What's the answer there?
Well, I think we need a pro-growth free market agenda that will unleash the economy. We have, trillions of dollars of natural resources locked beneath the ground because of anti-development legislation like C-69, C-48. We have a tax system that punishes work and business earnings. We have some of the slowest approvals for normal economic activity. It takes almost 3 times longer to get a warehouse approved for construction in Canada as it does in the United States, just as one example. We need to remove all of those obstacles to unleash the full power of free enterprise. That will generate the wealth necessary to phase out our deficit over time and make our enable our people to carry the enormous debt load that governments have thrust upon them.
Conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre joining me on the line. Pierre, thanks so much for coming on today. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, great to be with you, Andrew. Thank you very much.
We've got to take a break. When we come back, more of the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North.
You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Welcome back to the Andrew Lawton Show. You know, we've been talking about coronavirus alarmism and the WE scandal, and what else alarmism have we been talking about? We've been talking about cancel culture alarmism. We have a bit more on that later. We haven't talked about the climate change alarmism in quite a while, and I think it's time we do because of this little music video of sorts, commercial, I don't even know what you want to call it, put out by Burger King, which is, I know, not the place you go to for your intellectual public policy stimulation. But nonetheless, Burger King is wading into the climate change global warming fight with this. Cow farts and burps are no laughing matter, they say. They release methane, contributing to climate change. That's why we're working to change our cows' diet by adding lemongrass to reduce their emissions by approximately 30%. And then you get this video.
When cows fart and burp and splatter, well, it ain't no laughing matter. They're releasing methane every time they do. And that methane from the rear goes up to the atmosphere and pollutes our planet, warming me and you. Yes, that methane that they pass is a greenhouse gas that'll trap the sun's heat and change our climate too. Gee, is it hot in here or is it just me?
You know how at the height of the Dixie Chicks scandal, when they had criticized George Bush, someone had told them to shut up and sing? This is the opposite of that. This is stop singing and just cook burgers. And by the way, I know I look like I ate a lot of fast food. I don't. But when I have, I'm never really going to Burger King. I'm not a fan of their burgers, so maybe just, bow out altogether. But it is interesting when the people who are vilified by the climate crusaders decide that they want to be on the woke side. They want to be on the cool side and capitulate to them, except they don't seem to realize that all of the critics see them as the problem. So people that go on about bovine flatulence being the greatest menace to society since, the incandescent light bulb or something, they just think we should all be vegans. This is what Joaquin Phoenix talks about when he goes and speaks. This is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thinks. This is what all of these PETA activists try to say, maybe if they can't get us to eschew meat on humanitarian grounds, we can do it on global warming grounds. So with the exception of the fact that the video is spectacularly bad, and I think that's intentional, they're doing what, the David Suzuki Foundation loves to do and all of these other environmental groups, which is put a cute kid out front so you can't be mad at them. Because if a kid's telling you to do something, you're not going to be like, oh, go shut your mouth. This is the whole Greta Thunberg dilemma. By the way, has anyone heard anything of Greta Thunberg as of late? The one thing that coronavirus has done is sidelined the jet-setting climate crusaders. So Greta Thunberg, who I have no personal ill will or animus to, she has had nothing to do because everyone's been preoccupied. So the media fawning over her has at least been put on hold for now. But the alarmists love to put a child out front. And the interesting thing is they would love nothing more than for people to not eat meat. This is the whole point. And I take the view on this that there is going to be a natural cycle of things. We know that people are going to eat meat. We know that cows have to get out that gas somehow. This is not enough of a reason, I think, to sell to people, stop eating it. So as far as what Burger King is doing, listen, if there's an organic, and I don't mean that as far as organic food is concerned, but organic is, in other words, like a way that you can do this without a radical change by putting lemongrass in cows' diets, then fine. I mean, I like lemongrass in Asian cuisine. If Burger King wants to do a lemongrass burger patty, for example, I might give it a try if it seems to be unique or seems to be tasty. But it's fine. It's the idea of trying to win over a side that's never going to be all that fond of what you're doing. And I think that's what's happening here. And, you know, we had gone a little bit without having to hear about how we're all destroying the planet. And now it seems like we're getting back to that now. So everyone's going to be talking about destruction. We got to take a break. When we come back, more of the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North.
You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
We are back on the Andrew Lawton Show, and we have a very exciting announcement for you. 2 weeks from today, there is going to be another debate among the Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidates, all four: Leslyn Lewis, Peter MacKay, Aaron O'Toole, Derek Sloan. They're all going to be there in Toronto, broadcast live. True North is going to be carrying it, and yours truly is going to be one of the moderators for the debate. Now, this is a really exciting initiative, and it's one being pushed by the Independent Press Gallery of Canada. Now, the Independent Press Gallery is a new organization that's meant to be a counterbalance to the closed-off and, quite frankly, inaccessible and unfree parliamentary press gallery, the monopoly that has allowed the government to bar independent media, including, again, yours truly, from covering elections, from covering the work of government, from covering federal election debates, all of these things. So Candace Malcolm, who's my boss and friend here at True North, is now the president of the Independent Press Gallery. She's pushed this initiative forward, and I think it's a fantastic one. I'm not involved in any leadership role in it. I'm just an aspiring member of the Independent Press Gallery, and I was very grateful to have the opportunity to be co-moderating the debate alongside Candace in just a couple of weeks. And very grateful that all four candidates agreed to come. This debate is something that is so desperately needed. I've been covering the Conservative leadership race since the beginning, actually since even before the race began. And the questions that the mainstream media asks about it, the coverage that the mainstream media gives, is not really relevant to small c Conservatives in Canada. If you look at the official debate that the Conservative Party did, all of the questions that the media were asking afterwards in the scrums were about abortion and systemic racism. That was it. And those, quite frankly, aren't the issues that most Conservatives care about, aren't the issues that most Conservatives are talking about, and aren't the issues that the leadership candidates wanted to be talking about. So our goal in this debate is to actually ask the questions that matter to Conservative Canadians and to all Canadians, and actually asking questions that are putting a perspective forward and inviting a perspective and a dialogue that the mainstream media isn't doing. So it's going to be absolutely fantastic. I want you to mark your calendars for it. July 29th, 2020. It's going to be streamed at independentpressgallery.ca, and we'll also have links here at True North for you to access it, and there may even be an opportunity for you to submit a question. We'll have more on that later, but I wanted to put a plug in because this is going to be an absolutely great initiative, and I'm so honored and pleased to be a part of it, and it's coming up very quickly. I know a lot of Conservative Party of Canada members have already gotten their ballots in the mail. Many people may have, if they already knew who they were voting for, returned them already, but the whole point is for people that are undecided, we want to give yet another opportunity, and I'd say an even better one, to figure out where the candidates stand, how they stack up against one another, and all that jazz. So that's all coming up pretty soon. Just very briefly here, every now and then you get a story that you just wonder how on earth it happens. And this particular story comes from Midland Today, in the town of Midland, Ontario, where a bit of a sex scandal has embroiled the municipality, specifically the city council or town council of Midland. Carol McGinn may lose 15 days of pay because of conflict of interest allegations. The Integrity Commissioner investigated her conduct after complaints were made against her by the deputy mayor. And basically, the question comes down to whether she was using resources for the town-employed spouse. She is in a long-term, permanent, intimate relationship with a unionized employee of the town who could potentially be impacted by the town's decisions. This is what the report said. Now, Councillor McGinn says she didn't think there was a pecuniary interest. She didn't think that there was any reason that there would be a conflict here. But then it gets a little bit odd because she says that the reason she didn't think it was a problem is because this partner wasn't her main spouse, but rather her polyamorous secondary spouse. This is kind of a fun one here. The respondent's position states that she is polyamorous does not, in our view, alter our finding that her domestic partner is her spouse under both the code and the MCIA. That's the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And then it goes on, the report states she advises that they do live together. However, he doesn't always sleep at home, nor does she. And although they are life intimate and life sexual partners, she is polyamorous, gender fluid, and pansexual. They are not spouses, unquote. So now we have like everything being redefined, people being canceled, all this confusion. And now we can't even accept that the word spouse has a solid meaning, because if you are a polyamorous, gender fluid, and pansexual city councillor, well, that might be your wiggle room. Not that kind of wiggle room, but that might be your wiggle room to get out of it and say, oh, no, it wasn't that spouse, it was the other one. Oh boy. All right, when we come back, a final wrap up of the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North. Stay tuned.
You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Welcome back. This is kind of a fun story here from the New York Post. Teens are dressing up as mask-wearing grandmas to score alcohol. Yeah, I didn't think that it was too difficult to find alcohol, but I guess in the United States, when the drinking age is 21, you've got to work a little hard on it sometimes. So a new TikTok trend has emerged where teenagers are dressing up in grandmotherly clothes, putting a mask on so you can't see their young face, and then going to the liquor store and buying a bottle of whatever it is that the kids these days drink. A couple of different photos here. I know you can see them on the screen. It's actually quite impressive. I reward points for effort. You know, in fact, when I was underage, there were only a couple of occasions that I tried to sneak alcohol from the store. And in both cases, what I did was just buy a gift bag. I mean, I liked nicer stuff anyway, so it was okay. I was a bit of an alcohol diva from a young age. So when I was there, I'd buy a gift bag and, put on a collared shirt, and they never ID'd. I never had to use a fake because I was never actually carded. But again, I also quit while I was ahead. So the pandemic has opened up that door because everyone has to be masked. You can just put on a wig, put on your grandmotherly clothes, cover your face, and no one is any the wiser. And you can see in one case there, it looks like the teen on the left in the baggy white shirt is doing a celebratory dance after getting away with buying a bottle of, I'm trying to see what it is in the bag there that grandma's wearing. Is it like a cider? It's like a really bright can. So I feel like if you were to work at a liquor store and grandma's buying, a bright pink can of cider, maybe you should ask a couple of extra questions just to see. But you know what? As I said, points for effort. Kids are nothing if not ingenious when it comes to finding ways to get around the bans on buying alcohol and all that jazz. This is something really, really unfortunate. And, it's easy when we're talking about cancel culture to be happy when the left is cannibalizing itself and be happy that, that schadenfreude term, delight in the suffering of others. But I don't, because I think that culturally we're all worse off in the end when this happens. And here's an example this week when an ostensible liberal commentator, a center liberal commentator and columnist, Barry Weiss, has had to leave the New York Times because of a profoundly negative turn, where the New York Times is no longer interested in being the paper of record, but they're more interested in capitulating to the woke brigade on Twitter. And Barry Weiss, who's quite accomplished, and I've actually been a fan of her work, even if I don't agree with her on everything, has resigned. She issued an open letter talking about her gratitude and optimism when she was hired 3 years ago. She said that, there's a lot of work that the Times had to do to basically reach out to other perspectives, centrists, conservatives, and others who would not naturally think of the Times as their home. And she said she was proud of that effort. However, Twitter is not on the masthead of the New York Times, but Twitter has become its ultimate editor. Weiss writes, as the ethics and mores of that platform has become those of the paper itself has become increasingly a kind of performance space. Stories are chosen and told in a way to satisfy the narrowest of audience, rather than to allow a curious public to read about the world and then draw their own conclusions. I was always taught that journalists were charged with writing the first rough draft of history. Now history itself is one more ephemeral thing molded to fit the needs of a predetermined narrative. She goes on, and I think everyone needs to read this at her website, barryweiss.com, but she goes on to talk about how she's been called a Nazi and a racist, and despite the fact that she herself is Jewish, she's been talked about the fact that her colleagues have openly demeaned her and mocked her just because she is guilty of wrong things. She's not aligning with the woke narrative that is supposed to have been adopted by everyone on the left now. And in the same way that a lot of other people who are like J.K. Rowling on the left and in alignment with the left, but might not go 100% of the way, they are now canceled. Now, I had someone the other day after Monday's show accuse me of using the word woke too often and saying it's a stupid word. And there was like one segment last week where I used the term woke, like I think it was like 9 or 10 times in the span of a few minutes. This show, I've used it, I think I just used it my third reference right now. The whole point of the word woke, I don't actually support the word. I use it because it's kind of a mocking way of talking about this culture that the left has done. Woke is kind of like hip, but to social justice things. I had to explain, believe it or not, I had to explain the word woke to my boomer parents the other day. Lovely people, but it's very difficult to explain something to them that you find ridiculous and absurd, and to try to explain it in a way where you're not just like rolling your eyes and talking about how stupid it is. So I did my best, and that was what I came up with. It's like hip to social justice things, aware to whatever the social justice narrative is. But the great thing about it is that people on the left use it in a supportive way, people on the right use it in a pejorative way, and the word itself still has the same meaning. But Barry Weiss's crime, like Jonathan Kay's, like J.K. Rowling's, is that they don't go 100% of the way in the direction they're supposed to, so then they face the cancel mob. And the fact that, you know, say what you will about the New York Times, but the New York Times didn't used to be this terrified space. And remember what happened when they ran a column from a United States senator. There was a mutiny afoot in the editorial department, as though you're not supposed to use comment pages and columns to express differing perspectives. And even the publishing industry. Publishing has always been a space where you can publish radical ideas, very controversial ideas, and everyone has to just, you know, accept that this is the work of publishing. And now editors are saying, I won't work on this book. People that are, you know, just copy staff are saying, I'm not going to work on this book. And that's why there was a backlash against J.K. Rowling's publisher. So people are not even prepared to say, I'm going to put my feelings at the door to do my job. Now, let me tell you something on a personal note here. I've worked in radio. I used to do a daily talk radio show in London, Ontario, and I also guest hosted in Toronto, Calgary, and a few times on the nationally syndicated Roy Green show, and I had a blast. And, you know, in a lot of these, I would work with producers, and, you know, I try to come up with, and I think overwhelmingly throughout my career, the vast majority of the stories that I do are stories that I've found. But I would work with producers, they'd send ideas, they'd help line up guests and all of that stuff. And I had producers at various points that I knew I was diametrically opposed to politically. I had, in one case, a producer. She was absolutely fantastic. She was a lefty vegan. Fine with me. She was a lefty vegan. I was a, you know, Bible-thumping, hardline conservative, and that is absolutely fine because, you know what? It worked. She came up with stories. She would put guests on. We had a blast. There was no, that I was aware of anyway, you know, I can't do this because I disagree with you. And I've had other producers as well. And it's the same thing because you have a job to do. So the idea that people who work in an editorial perspective, in a production capacity, the idea that people who work in a publishing industry are unable to or unwilling to allow someone that they don't agree with to succeed or to even exist is in and of itself the essence of cancel culture. And in the case of the New York Times, I mean, again, liberal paper, I get it. Their editorial bias is liberal. That's fine. There's space for that. But the idea that in an op-ed department, in an editorial department, in a column department, in all of these spaces, that someone would be forced out for having the wrong opinions is absolutely shameful. And again, I could take delight in the left eating its own, but I won't because I know that we are on the losing side of this battle. and it's going to continue to get worse and worse unless people start to push back against it. And that's where we are now. I mean, we're at a reckoning right now. When the canceled is growing, the club of the canceled, as my friend Mark Stein calls it, is getting larger and larger. Surely there are more and more people that would be willing to link arms and say, okay, we're going to push back against this. But the problem is that even a lot of people on the left who have gone through being canceled are not quite willing to lock arms with people on the right who have been canceled. Because they're still like, oh, well, my opinions were about, oh, no, I don't want to be in line with those opinions. And that's where we are now. But people have to realize, listen, this is a trend. And it's why I defended the woman in Central Park, Amy Cooper, that everyone called Central Park Karen. It's why I've defended Barry Weiss. It's why I defended J.K. Rowling. Because if you don't stand up for your political opponents when their right to free speech or their fundamental essence of free speech is being threatened, you don't actually believe in that idea as strongly as you think you do. We have to end things for today. My thanks to all of you who tuned into the show and also to Pierre Poilievre for coming on. We'll be back next week with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show. Thank you, God bless, and good day.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.